Hi everybody, welcome. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Chiamaka Esther Amefule, and I will be starting a 4 part series on job interviews. So everything about job interviews, from what to do when you don't know the answer to an interview question. So if you're in the midst of an interview and you're having a nervous breakdown, like how do you get yourself out of that? So that's what I'll be covering in this video. And the next part will be looking at how do you get your panel of interviewers to like you. It is possible to win the war before it starts. Yes, it is. I do it all the time, and people I support do it all the time. So I will be telling you how to do so. And I might be finishing off with how to know if the company is right for you, because you might be in search of a job, but it might not be the right fit for you. And there are ways, there are certain criteria to look at to ascertain that. So I will be doing a 3-part series. I'm talking about all of that. So, if you want to make sure you have all of the information and support you need to have a very successful interview session from start to finish, stay tuned. Now, if you've watched my video on how to predict job interview questions without fail, if you haven't, I'll put a tag to it on somewhere on the screen, or I'll put a link to the video in the description box. And if you haven't, I would suggest that you do. So you have the full contextual information of what we'll be talking about today. But if you've watched it, or if you're about to watch it, when you do, you realize that I talk about a range of principles, a range of criteria that would help you predict job interview questions a full time, and that would in turn enable you to prepare answers as well for those questions. But sometimes scenarios can arise where the way you have phrased your question in your preparatory stage is not how the question is thrown at you within an interview, and you can be taken aback if that happens. It's very, very common and it's very normal. Or it can be that you haven't prepared well enough. It happens, especially if you're already in a full-time job and you're looking to pivot or change organizations or climb through the ranks. You might not have enough time to do your due diligence, and sometimes some employers don't give you enough time, like 4 or 5 days or 3 or 4 days to prep for an interview. So you may not have enough time to do your due diligence, and then when you're given questions that you haven't heard of, thought about, prepared for, you're like, "Ooh, what is going on here?" So you can have a bit of a nervous breakdown within interview sessions. Another scenario that can happen is, and I know we do this commonly, most interviewers, employers do this as well, is where you get like multi-tiered questions, multi-part questions, almost like 3 questions in one. And you might know part A and not know part B and C, or you might know part B and not know part A and C, and you're like, again, thrown off balance. So I will be talking about how do you navigate through those unprecedented how do you navigate through unprecedented scenarios like that? I hope that's the right word. But like, how do you get yourself out of those situations and make sure that you still have a very positive interview experience, and you still get across your value in the way that you have it, and in the way that convinces the employers that you're the one for the job. So we'll be talking about that. Now, the first scenario is, what if a question that is thrown at me is phrased very differently to how I've prepared for it, or is asked in a way that is very complex? What do I do? Now, the thing to do there is to take a minute or few minutes and pause, right? And then from the question, try and single out the keywords, then break the keywords into the most basic terms, and then ask yourself, what is this question ultimately getting at? Okay, so pause, single out keywords, break it down into like the most simplistic meaning, and then try to get a narrative out of that question. Now, it's better for you to ask for a few minutes to pause and understand what is being asked, than for the fear of silence you start to speak off point. Now, a really good way to do this is for you to ask the interview, can you please repeat that question? And then while they're doing it, get yourself a paper and a pen beforehand, and then jot down keywords from the interview question that is being said before you. Or if you're having a remote interview, so maybe via Teams or via Zoom, you can ask your interviewer to copy and paste the question into the chat box. That way you have a visual representation of it, and then you can look at it. Okay, again, get your paper and pen and write out certain keywords, and then try to diffuse them into more simple meanings and get a narrative out of it. And then I'll give you an example of a way to do that. Now, If we are, for instance, you're applying or you've applied for a job where project management skills are very pertinent to that job delivery, as is the case for most jobs, and a question of this such is posed at you. So a question can be, in a cross-sectoral or multi-partner project where there is persistent conflicting views by partners of equal power and influence, how would you ensure that the project progress stays on track and its objectives are met and partner commitments are not hampered? Now, I'll say it again, and I'll probably put it on the screen as well. It says, in a cross-sectoral or multi-partner project where there is persistent conflicting views by partners of equal power and influence, how would you ensure that the project progress stays on track, the objectives are met, and partners' commitments are not hampered? Now, the question I asked, not only is it multi-tiered, multi-part, but it's also quite complex, right? There are lots of words that were used in there, sometimes jargons, words that are unfamiliar to you. And sometimes if the person that is asking the question, the interviewer, has a good command of grammar, there would be sort of commas or semicolons after every phrase. So that kind of gives you an idea of the different phrases to attack, you can answer phrase by phrase. But if that's not the case, remember, you already have the question repeated and you're jotting that down, or you have the questions in the chat box. So now you have a visual before you for you to address. Now, if I would break that question down, the first keyword or the key phrase that I will be looking at is cross-sectoral. Now, that just means partners from different parts of the industry. So it might be, education, it might be health, it might be transport. So it's cross-sectoral project is just projects that cuts across several sectors, right? And then the other keyword there is conflicting, and that sort of gives itself away. That just means disagreements. And then you have another phrase there that was included, which is partners of equal power and influence, and then that just means two big players. That's just what they mean by that. And then the next ask there was, how would you ensure that project progress stays on track? It just means how you're going to ensure that that project meets its assigned deadline, it stays within scope, so the outcomes, the objectives of interest, it actually does meet its initial quality standards, it stays within the allocated budget. So how would you ensure that everything happens as it's planned for it to happen from the set go? That's just what that means. And then the next thing is, how would you ensure that partners' commitments are not hampered? Simply put, that just means how would you make sure that all parties, or these two equal players, stay interested from start to finish of the project and you don't lose them? What I've just done there is to dissect that multi-part questions into several keywords or key phrases, and then for each keyword or key phrase, sort of dilute them down to the very most simple terms, and then put all of that narrative together and then ask myself, okay, what is this question ultimately asking? And if you look at all of the different bits that we've just discussed, you will know that all they're asking there is, how do you manage conflict in a way that everybody stays happy and the project still happens as it was planned? All of this big drama, big grammar, big words, and different parts, it's just asking, how would you make sure that if we give you a project, it happens as we want it to happen, how we've planned for it to happen, and everybody that is part of that project stays happy? Okay, but when you break it down and sort of derive that more simple narrative, you realize that it's actually not very difficult to answer, and then you have a bit more confidence in approaching that question. So we've talked about how do you handle a scenario where the question that is being asked is phrased differently to how you've prepared for it, or it's sort of multi-part, multi-tiered, right? Now the next thing is, how do you deal with a question that you have absolutely no idea on how to tackle it? Like, it's a question that you haven't thought of, you haven't anticipated. Now, for everything, the golden rule is just to pause, take some time to breathe, and make sure you understand the question clearly. Again, that might mean being asking for the interviewers to repeat the question or asking for it to be copied into the chat box. I know as an interviewer, we tend to get uncomfortable with the idea of silence, and we feel like that gives the impression that we are incompetent and sort of jeopardizes our chances of getting the job. But actually, what gives the impression of incompetence is when you answer a question without carefully thinking about it, or you answer a question in a way that the answer is incomplete or is incoherent. And most times it's okay to ask, or do you mind if I take a few minutes to just review the question so I can present the best possible answer? And most times we don't actually mind. If anything, it gives us the impression that you are someone who is strategic in the way you address issues, and you're able to do things in a more cool and collected state of mind. So always ask for some time. So if you get a question that you haven't sort of prepared for, and you might sort of start to find that you're getting sort of nervous or getting agitated, take some time. That will take a minute, and that minute gives you time to sort of diffuse that feeling of nervousness that you're feeling inside. And another cool trick that I've done in the past, a while ago now, but I've done this before, and sometimes I even tell people that I consult for to do so, is that, you have usually in interviews, before you start, you have a glass of water or something beside you, and you're like, oh, do you mind if I can just take a quick water break? And as you're drinking the water, it's not because you're thirsty. You're not thirsty. You're just buying yourself some thinking time. And to be honest, that's not even necessary. Honestly, it's okay to ask for some time to sort of think upon what is being asked so that you can answer correctly. And that thinking time allows you to now think of some of the answers that you've prepared previously, and then which of those would, apply duly in this context. And I frankly believe that if you, again, watch my previous video on how to predict questions without fail, and if you go through all of the points I mentioned in terms of how to prepare for an interview and how to prepare answers in advance, I doubt you have a question where you haven't prepared for, or a question that will be so completely out of touch to what you have anticipated. So I would say go through the steps I do talk about, especially the last point that I do mention, which honestly is a non-negotiable. To wrap this up, the main points are preparedness. The more prepared you are for an interview, the more confident you will be in answering those questions that are being posed at you. And again, my video on how to predict job interview question helps you through that sort of preparatory phase. So prepare as well and as diligently as you can. And then the second thing is just, take a minute, pause, ask for the question to be repeated, ask for the question to be added to the chat box. And as we discussed, jot down certain keywords and phrases, diffuse them to the most simple terms, and then, plan a first line of response, right? Because when you know the first thing or the first phrase or the first sentence you say, the rest is kind of free flowing from there. And then the last thing is review as you are thinking, diffusing sentences and whatnot. Review the list of prepared answers that you have and see, okay, which of these things, even though it's not completely, but which of these questions or answers I've prepared, has some sort of relevance or is applicable to this question I'm being asked. Now, if you follow all of these steps, you're well on your way to having, a sort of stress-free, confident interview experience. Now, let me know if you have other tips on how to, get yourself out of a nervous fix while you're in an interview, or to address questions that are unplanned in here. And if you have any further questions, I'll be in the comment box. So until next time, Dr. Chiamaka Esther Amaefule, and we'll speak soon. God bless you.